Introducing Discount Domitresque.
You see, I can see this here. I look like if Lady Domitresque came from Lancashire. Oi, Daniela, go chuck us a bag of crisps. I'm starving. And put kettle on while you're up and all.
Resident Evil has always interested me. Of course it has. I adore horror. And not just because I'm a complete weirdo that likes to see all the guts. But I love learning about how horror has evolved, whether it be watching the classic movies starring the likes of Vincent Price, or reading the works of Stephen King. I absorb it all and take a more cultural avenue to justify my peculiar pastime. And this of course is true for games. Classic horror is disgustingly fascinating, and it's so cool to see how gameplay styles have emerged through influence from other works and sometimes hardware limitations. Most interesting to me are the tropes of horror and how they came to be, like the slasher subgenre in movies for example, and early horror games are full of tropes that have become a staple of survival horror. I deeply, truly love the Silent Hill series and its survival elements. The limited resources and weak protagonists make every encounter feel intense and therefore matter. I own all the main series Silent Hill games, and throughout the years, it seems like a constant comparison has been drawn to it and Resident Evil for both of their huge impacts on the survival horror genre.
So because of this, I decided to start investing in Resident Evil games about a decade ago. To this day, I've got all the main series games plus their remakes, and before Resident Evil 8, I had played none of them.
The huge lore and spin-offs and books and movies, it's crazy, it's overwhelming. I felt intimidated and didn't know there was just too much to catch up on, so I've been putting this series off and off and off. But then Resident Evil Village was announced, and I was so desperate to be a Resident Evil fan, and Village looked like it would tick all my boxes. Take the expectancy of the title out of it, look at it out of context as just a horror game with giant boob vampire lady, and yeah, I'm in.
But just can this game work as a standalone title? Will it provide me with enough to want to go and learn all about the series' origin and lore? Will it lead to a curiosity of the Resident Evil world? Or will it be too out of context for a newcomer to enjoy?
But thankfully newcomers have the option to receive an overview of the previous game which, although does have spoilers, works in providing this much needed context to help with understanding the opening and the basic premise of the game. Oh, and by the way, this video is going to be like one big spoiler from start to finish, so yeah, apologies. Right after the events of Resident Evil 7, Ethan and his wife Mia have had a baby! Oh, the game's about a baby, I'm triggered. The adorable little Rose. Mia is incredibly reluctant to talk about the events of the previous game when suddenly, out of nowhere, Chris Redfield appears and shoots her. They retrieve her body and take Rose and Ethan away. The van they're traveling in crashes, and when Ethan comes to, he finds Rose is gone. So our mission is to find out about our wife's death and find our daughter.
Have you seen a little girl?
Following the route through the trees and snow, we come across a village, and some shit has clearly gone down here. An elderly villager who's jumpy as fuck gives us a gun and gets himself killed. And now I'm surrounded by dead bodies, cause what the fuck? And there's some creature numbing and some flesh, and then I'm getting attacked and I kill it, and here we go! The opening sequence is quite intense, gradually increasing the amount of these Lycan guys you encounter to the point where you have to survive this huge onslaught and a timed attack with constant waves of enemies and this huge guy, holy frick! It's also a fantastic tutorial section-ish without any tedious hand-holding. Initial run-throughs will introduce you to the survival elements with limited ammo and strong fast enemies. Learning when to use a bullet or a melee attack instead and making sure all your shots are deadly accurate to reduce your ammo usage. And I say initial playthroughs because any subsequent playthroughs on a new game plus save sees your inventory brought over in its entirety, and since this footage was from playthrough number 10, I had managed to get an infinite ammo magnum like some indestructible god. Like its predecessor, we take control of Ethan in a first-person perspective. Don't get me wrong, I love old school horror with fixed camera angles, it's claustrophobic and there's tons of blind spots, but first person is spooky. It's an additional level of immersion that helps build the atmosphere. The controls are wonderfully simple: block, attack, move. Nothing fancy at all. It doesn't need to be fancy. It's incredibly easy to pick up and just get into. The focus is more on the setting and the events. Easier difficulties have an aim assist too, which becomes less effective as the difficulty goes up. The highest difficulty, Village of Shadows, has no aim assist at all, or one that I didn't even notice, so the effectiveness and responsiveness of the controls really shine when it's entirely down to you to keep your accuracy. After the Lycan attack, we help a father and daughter get to the house of Louisa, who is keeping the surviving villagers safe. And this is one of those events that the game has just amped up. It's not just about the scares, it's about the feeling it creates. The absolute horror of watching the father turn into a lichen and the death of everyone in the house. The mad dash escape full of what ifs and brutal holy shit moments that end up with Ethan being alone again. Ethan believes baby Rose is being kept in the castle, and I'm like, oh shit, this is where it's gonna start going down. So much of the hype built up about this game centered around the gigantic Lady Dimitrescu. The small amounts of gameplay I'd seen about Resident Evil 8 took place in this castle, and this is what sold me on the game. A huge, fantastically decorated, sprawling castle free to explore, all the time being stalked by Lady D. And to some extent this is true. The castle was a little smaller than I'd anticipated and a touch linear in how the exploration opened up, but I still had a lot of fun figuring out the puzzles and tangling with Dimitrescu and her daughters. I particularly enjoyed the puzzles in which I had to examine my key items to find a secret about them, such as removing the stone from the ring and using it to open a door, or taking this animal's skull off its mount and putting it in place of the mask on this statue to unlock a mechanism. There's a lot of lore in this castle. How the daughters came to be and the diet of flesh and blood they consume was extraordinary to piece together through notes and set pieces, with an internal dilemma of wanting to explore but not wanting to encounter Lady Dimitrescu. The first encounter with Dimitrescu during gameplay was brutal. You're just casually pulling a lever and she just appears and chops your arm off. With your shooting arm gone, you have to outrun her in her literal Wolverine claws and use the magical healing juice to stick your arm back on. Is that a normal thing for Resident Evil? There's several scripted encounters with her that are predictable on subsequent playthroughs, but she still does have this level of menacing unpredictability that will make you nervous as you pace the ornate corridors. She's fairly easy to avoid though, but the harder the difficulty, the quicker she moves, so always have an escape route planned as her death claws can deal a whack of damage. But it's not just Alcina Dimitrescu out to kill Ethan in the castle. She has 3 daughters too.
Cassandra, turn that telly down!
They don't wander the corridors like their mother and do appear in predetermined sequences, but we need to defeat all 3 of them before tackling their mother. They're invulnerable unless exposed to low temperatures, so each fight plays out differently as you try to expose their weak spots before exploiting them. They're quite simple mini-bosses with just a shoot tactic once they're vulnerable, but my biggest issue with the daughters isn't the fights with them, but how interchangeable they are from one another. I have no idea who is who in this trio, and it doesn't really matter either. They're all just weird and creepy, and they're even wearing the same outfit to make them even more homogenous. Don't get me wrong, I love their design, beauty juxtaposed with gore, but their actual characters need some work. But to go along with these fabulously designed characters and settings are some gorgeous graphics too. I played this on the base PS4 and it really impressed me. Faces full of expression, gloriously flowing fabrics, grim and gory enemies. I swear when I ever finally get hold of a PS5, I'll be putting this game on first for comparison's sake. But I did get a lot of texture pop in though, mostly when approaching doors like I was moving too quickly for the game to catch up with. But like I said, this is a base PS4 that I've owned since 2015, so I can imagine the performance being better on a better console. Apart from that, I had no other technical issues, no frame rate drops, no crashes. It's disgustingly reliable. So our goal in the castle is to find Rose and escape. We've been locked in and are going to be devoured by the Dimitrescu family. To escape, we need to find 4 masks and place them on these pedestals. Scouring the castle to find these was great fun. The elaborate and convoluted contraptions were ridiculously fantastic. So silly that someone would set their house up this way, but like in the best possible way. But careful observation is required to solve these puzzles, paying close attention to the masks and examining them to find how many pegs they have and which pedestal this corresponds to. Placing them in the right pedestals opens up the exit. We grab a knife and stab Dimitrescu, who retaliates by transforming into her true form. Jesus! Oh god, this is so gross and menacing. Their previous dialogue and that of her daughters is focused on cutting and slicing to ribbons, but now it's moved on to more aggressive language, flesh, bone, devouring. It's really quite intimidating, as is her weird giant dragon thing form, crashing through the towers of the castle, so full of rage at the death of her daughters. And she makes a really good point at the hypocrisy of Ethan's mission. Killing Lady D's daughters in order to save our own, where do we draw the line here? I guess we don't. We kill her and pick up this weird flask, which turns out to be Rose's head. Ah, the baby's in bits, lads. The baby is in bits. Such a shocking moment during that revelation. Ethan disturbed beyond the point of being grief-stricken. But I guess it's okay because Rose can be saved if we find all the other pieces of her. And it's at this point you realise that Lady Dimitrescu, the main focus of the latter publicity for the release of Village, is only the start of the game. I had no idea there was going to be so much more beyond Dimitrescu. Although I did have some inkling there was going to be more to it during Ethan's initial capture when we meet Mother Miranda, the leader of the village, and the four lords, her children, with whom it is revealed she has entrusted to each a piece of rose for them to guard. Lady Dimitrescu was the first of the four lords and will need to defeat them all in order to recover all of the rose flasks. But when introduced to this concept, I thought it was going to be more open, like you could tackle the lords in any order you want, but it is in fact completely linear, which is a bit disappointing. But the village itself is explorable at any time, almost acting like a hub world in between the main lord levels with buildings to explore and treasures to find. Further parts of the village are unlocked as you progress and obtain various items, but the way it opens up does feel organic and it's rewarding to discover these treasures and items. Treasures themselves, whilst not providing any words or explanation, come with context such as their location and design, which gives backstory and life to the village, though their primary purpose is to sell to the Duke, this mysterious man who seems to be in the most convenient places to sell you his wares and buy anything excess off you. The most useful thing to spend money on is on the various weapons and parts he stocks, but he can also upgrade your weapons too, which can be very expensive. If I remember correctly, it took like a playthrough and a half to get enough money to fully upgrade the Stake Magnum, my weapon of choice once I unlocked unlimited ammo and everything. The Duke also sells ammo and healing, but that's where exploration becomes vital. These items are incredibly expensive, but enough searching will see you collecting materials to craft enough of these supplies that buying these from the Duke need only be done in emergencies. So each of the four lords is a mutated human who was part of Mother Miranda's experiments with the mould that featured in the previous game. She is looking for a vessel to bring back her own departed daughter, Eva. The four lords are the closest to a success story in her experimentation, but are still unsuitable vessels. But their mutations each brought along a different power. Lady Dimitrescu has super healing and accelerated growth, but needs to consume human flesh to maintain this. The next of the four lords we need to defeat is the doll maker Donna Beneviento, who communicates through her doll Angie. And I want more than anything to own an Angie doll. She's so cute. I love her. Donna has the power to induce hallucinations, and my god, is her section the creepiest part of the game by far. Introducing House Beneviento, set in front of a beautiful waterfall, and I want to live here so bad, it's gorgeous. We head down to the lower level of the house to be met with Angie and a rose flask. The lights go out, and when they come back on, all of our inventory is gone. We are completely defenseless. Immediately in the center of the room is a life-size doll replica of Mia. We can remove her limbs for some items and clues to puzzles. Each time in doing so, we hear a snippet of Mia talking through the radio, see her silhouette running through the doll room. Further investigations and exploration, and to my absolute horror, I found hiding places. Which meant I knew something was gonna start stalking me, something that I couldn't fight off, but I didn't know when and in what capacity this thing would show up in. My initial assumption was it was gonna be the Mia doll. This is the doll maker's house after all, completely filled with dolls. It has to be some doll monstrosity, right? Right? Oh god, it's not, is it? The house goes dark. I'm no longer following visions of Mia. I'm running away from a giant baby. This is the most stressful thing I've ever experienced, running away from this skinless fetus that drags itself along the ground, laughing, crying and babbling with a humongous mouth that reminds me of a basking shark. And this thing will swallow you whole if you get too close, and will suddenly appear, requiring a mad dash to a hiding place and waiting for it to move on. First time through is the best time through, not quite knowing how the baby moves or behaves, having a vague idea when it's going to come back when events occur, but that final bit trying to get back to the elevator, press the button, Ethan, press the button! After that section, I just had to stop and take a breather. It was intense. Absolutely incredible, and hands down my favourite part about this game. Unfortunately, once we get to the top of the elevator, the scares end in House Beneviento, and the game never really gets this scary again. Like, I usually hate jump scares, they're just a cheap way to induce anxiety, but in House Beneviento, I was already in an anxious state anyway, and the jump scares were really effective. Not just loud noises, it was pictures falling off the wall, doors opening by themselves, the baby appearing, they all got me a fucker. The end portion of this level is the confrontation with Donna and Angie. You play hide and seek with Angie, who appears in a finite amount of locations. Once you've played this section a couple of times, you'll know the locations she can appear in and in which stage of the game she'll use them. Ethan uses a pair of scissors to stab Angie 3 times before the game ends, revealing this has all been one big hallucination by Donna and it's her you've in fact killed. It led me to question this whole section in a really thought-provoking way. Like, obviously Mia and the giant baby were hallucinations, but how much of the rest of it was real? The puzzles were based around Ethan's life, rebuilding the music box, the code to the door being his wedding anniversary, etc. That surely wasn't real. Then there's Angie. Was she ever really alive? Or was Donna there the whole time, puppeting her? Did we ever even lose our weapons to begin with? Like, it's one big mindfuck, and I didn't want to leave, but alas, we find the rose flask and have to move on. I guess this section did build some lore around Donna and Angie, but nowhere near as much as the Domitress level. Most of this really served to build Ethan's character more than anything, which was totally cool and justifiable, but I'd love to know more about Donna and her power. The third lord we confront is Moreau, this lumpy wee fuck who's so gross and literally the most pathetic thing I've ever seen. But that's his character. His section is probably the weakest in the game, especially coming off the back of the scares in Beneviento. Moreau's mutation is quite unstable, and he finds it difficult to contain his true form, this giant fish frog guy. Again, this was incredibly anxiety inducing. I knew there was going to be a giant fish in the level, but how and when I didn't know. Gave me a good fright when he appeared for the first time. Goodness gracious. Dodging him as well as he swims through the water was kind of intense. He'd quite suddenly just jump out, but when and where won't change in subsequent playthroughs. His boss battle was one of the easiest and basic too. The whole section is over really quickly. Out of all the 4 lords levels, his is the shortest and easiest. Not like it's bad, but it's very standard compared to the rest of the game. Even Moreau himself is the least complex and developed of the 4 lords, and that's coming straight off House Beneviento with Donna, who literally said 1 line of dialogue. He's one note basically and easy to understand. The final lord and the one billed as the most dangerous is Carl Heisenberg, and he is basically Magneto. He can control metal and resides in a factory where he experiments on corpses, modifying them and adding mechanical parts before using electricity to bring them back to life, all Frankenstein-esque. His intention being to create an army to take down Mother Miranda, whom he deeply resents and hates. He also plans on weaponizing Rose, who apparently has huge power, and suggests he and Ethan should team up. When Ethan refuses, Heisenberg knocks him away into the sprawling factory with his metal army prowling the corridors. These guys are so intimidating, huge tools attached to their arms, and they're incredibly tough to beat. They have weak spots which very helpfully glow bright red. Here I suggest turning off aim assist if you have it on so you can better aim at the weak spots and kill them quicker and more efficiently. The exploration of this level is around finding molds to cast various level progressing items, having to return to the foundry room each time a mold is found. There's a couple of different routes to the foundry, so it's not too backtracky in that sense. Plus the final time you make your way to the foundry is in the pitch black with the soldat soldiers appearing quite suddenly and in their strongest forms. Super spooky. The soldat to me are definitely the scariest enemies in the game, just by how imposing and intimidating they are. They are human but lack humanity. Flesh and bone yet mechanical. It's uneasy to look at them, and the noises they produce as they are released from their holds or firing up their drills made my palms sweat. Enemy design in general is really cool, and all enemies look intimidating, but variety is lacking. It'll mostly be Lycans you fight. There's a few different varieties and models of them. Then there's these creepy guys in the castle and the creepy guys in the gardens of Beneviento, but they're really similar to one another in design and behaviour. In fact, the soldats in the factory are the only ones that really require a specific strategy to beat, and there's a good diversity in them too. Initially, the factory was my least favourite level in the game. I found it hard to navigate when backtracking and became lost a few times. It also just kills your ammo reserves with the abundance of strong enemy types, and I really wasn't looking forward to going back through it. Luckily, by the next playthrough, when I had a better understanding of the level layout, I'd learned to appreciate it a lot more. It really has a twisted, bizarre aesthetic and atmosphere, and it's the most unique setting visually in the whole game. It's here we finally get some answers from Chris Redfield. Like, dude, why are you going about killing my wife? Well, Ethan, that wasn't your wife. That was Mother Miranda. She had learnt Rose was nearby and wanted to use Rose as a vessel to reincarnate her own deceased daughter. Baby Rose has amazing powers even Mother Miranda is scared of, all around controlling the mold which Mother Miranda herself uses to control the village. But Chris, why did you not just tell me that was Miranda and we could have just listened to you and tried to stay safe? No, we're not getting involved. Well, Chris, I've killed 3 of the 4 lords without having a clue what's going on. Sounds pretty involved to me. If you literally had opened with, Ethan, stay back, that's not your wife, then maybe we could have avoided getting our hands chopped off and being chased by a giant baby. So much of this was avoidable. Just tell Ethan, god damn it. So Chris acknowledges we're too far down the rabbit hole now and casually just makeshifts a tank or something. So we take the tank whilst Chris plants explosives in the factory, and this game just goes a little bit mad. We fight the mutated Heisenberg in the tank because why not? We defeat him like the badass we are. Once he's destroyed, Mother Miranda appears and rips Ethan's heart out, and I'm just like... And now we're in control of Chris Redfield for a huge tonal shift as we shoot fuck out everything to go and stop Mother Miranda. The whole village has basically been destroyed as the mold erupts from the ground. We make our way underground and acknowledge we should have told Ethan everything. Yes, I already know that. Plant a bomb to destroy the village and find Mia alive. In terms of strength of gameplay, it's a touch generic in the way you just fight waves of lichens, but it doesn't outstay its welcome. It's a fairly short section of the game and serves more for exposition than anything. Upon finding Miranda's lab, there's some really interesting information about her opinions of the 4 lords, her pre-mutated life, and there's even a connection to the original game here too. After this section though, the biggest revelation occurs. Ethan survived his heart being ripped out somehow. We get questioned as to how we can survive all this stuff we've been through, being stabbed and strung up and my arm chopped off. Well, Ethan's been dead this whole time. In fact, he died during the events of Resident Evil 7 and his body is made entirely from the mold. But he is succumbing to his injuries now and makes one last push to save Rose. The 4 Rose flasks are brought together and Rose is brought back to normal, but Eva is not reincarnated. Ethan confronts Miranda in a final showdown, beats her and rescues Rose. The final fight has some good moments. Miranda herself is graceful and relentless. She spouts lines of dialogue throughout the whole thing, revealing her plan, which is really fun and very villainesque. But all it really comes down to is shooting her until the fight stops. In a weird way, I feel really sorry for Mother Miranda. Her whole mission has been influenced by grief over the loss of her daughter. She's objectively done awful things which do not justify the means to reach the end. But it's perspective here that counts. She is a mother driven past the point of insanity, doing whatever was necessary to be reunited with her daughter. Even her final words are calling out her daughter's name, and it's kind of heartbreaking to hear the agony in her voice. Rose is saved and Ethan falls to his knees. Chris helps him up to guide him to safety, but it's too late for Ethan. Knowing he has moments left to live and he's just slowing down Chris and Rose, he takes the detonator away before he becomes separated from them. And I'm not crying, you're crying. The utter heartbreak in having to say goodbye to his daughter, and he calls her by her full name. Goodbye, Rosemary. Oh, that shit is just gut-wrenching. Mia and Rose are reunited and the escape begins, but before Chris can answer the "where's Ethan" question, a huge explosion occurs, completely destroying the village. The joy of being reunited with her child shattered by the death of her husband. Cut to some time later and Rose has grown up. She's under constant surveillance but has wiggled away to visit her father's grave. She's picked up by an agent and we get a hint about Rose's power. She doesn't display it, but acknowledges it. This all feels like it's opening up for a sequel following Rose and her powers. There was a lot of talk about it, but I still don't have a clear understanding of what she is capable of. I mean, this could be a lack of context, play another Resident Evil game sometime, you uncultured nitwit moment. But I feel like how it's positioned in the story right at the end leaves it dangling there as sequel bait. But man, this was a ride. Each of the 4 lords felt so unique from one another with their own gimmicks to make the whole experience feel varied and never stale. Like they are their own self-contained gauntlets. Almost like Zelda dungeons in the way the game is structured, I guess. Even gameplay style changes from lord to lord, whether it be stealth, being defenseless, chase sequences or exploration. There's something here for everyone to appreciate. Upon finishing your first playthrough, you unlock the bonus content shop, and by completing in-game challenges you gain CP, a currency to use specifically in this shop. You can buy artwork and models, but most interestingly, weapons and infinite ammo if you have a fully upgraded weapon. This really incentivizes going back to complete more of these challenges to be able to get these weapons. And it's part of the reason why I played this game again and again and again. Each time for a specific reason though. A different difficulty, a run through to get more money to upgrade my weapons, and under 3 hours playthrough, and then going in again to try and beat that record. Replay value is not lacking if you set yourself a target that motivates you. And I still have so much I want to do. A run under 1 hour 50 minutes and a no guns run, for example. Trying different strategies is always fun, and beating the first 3 difficulties was great for testing how far I could stretch myself, but enemies will still appear in the same quantities and in the same areas, which leads to heavy predictability. Which is good when you're trying to race through the game, but can become a little mindless. Experimenting with different weapons does keep it fresher, but unfortunately my favourite level did begin to get a bit stale after like playthrough 7 or something. No matter what difficulty you play this on, Beneviento won't change, which is where the defenseless gameplay works against it. There's no experimentation with weapon combinations and strategies because you have no weapons. And the pattern and behaviour of the baby doesn't change either, and it kind of just becomes an inconvenience to get around. Don't get me wrong, I still love this section, just look at the house, but the layout and the gameplay stagnates. While House Beneviento will never change regardless of what difficulty you play it on, there is one final difficulty that is unlocked after your first playthrough that does change things up quite significantly. The hardest difficulty is called Village of Shadows, the name of the fairy tale book that foreshadows the Four Lords of Miranda. The game's layout still doesn't change, but if you want a good challenge and a difference in enemy locations and numbers, then this is the one for you. Stronger enemies appear earlier and in greater numbers. Like, the fallow plot usually just has lichens prowling in it. I didn't even think about the lichens in Village of Shadows because I thought I knew what to expect, and then all of a sudden, what the fuck is that guy doing here? Run away, run away, run away. It just makes the game so tense again. I didn't know where enemies were going to be this time, which made it so exciting and unexpected. A couple of good examples include the hand bit in the castle. Usually you just have to avoid Lady Dimitrescu, but on Village of Shadows there's some enemies to dodge too. I didn't expect the final one in the corridor either. And in the factory, on any other difficulty, the weakest enemy type here will knock the door through to the foundry to ambush you. But on Village of Shadows I was hanging back waiting for them to come through, but nothing was happening. So I walk into the foundry and oh no, I'm being greeted by the strongest enemy in the factory. In fact, this whole difficulty was just what I was looking for. A good shake-up of the enemy placement and encounters that mattered. The challenge wasn't too bad either, even with the factory being pumped full of difficult enemies. And then I got to the Heisenberg boss battle. My strong, fully upgraded weapons were taken away from me, and this tank can fuck right off. It moves so slow, the guard just doesn't work, and Heisenberg is fast. Plus, during this battle you can't heal for some reason, so it's like 3 hits and you're dead or something. You have to be like perfect. Firing the cannon when Heisenberg charges at you, being pixel perfect with your machine gun shots to attack his weak spots and slow him down. Honestly, I nearly gave up. Almost 2 hours I was stuck here trying to get past this wanker. But see, when I did, I could have cried. I felt like the ultimate human, like I could do anything. World peace? Yeah, I could make that happen. Easy. I beat the Heisenberg boss battle on Village of Shadows. Come and give me something difficult. The Chris Redfield section also took a few tries because I was forced to use his weapons and not the OP ones I had for Ethan. But that was nothing compared to the Heisenberg boss. Redfield section was more about patience and going slowly. But honestly, the Heisenberg boss battle put me off doing Village of Shadows ever again, despite how much I love the rest of it. But hey, I just went on easy difficulties and played it again. As of recording, I've played it 11 times in a row, and I don't feel done with this. I think I've found my soulmate. I just love this, even without any prior experience of Resident Evil games. I didn't need it at all, it worked just fine. I mean, I knew enough about the series to catch some of the references, like Heisenberg calling Chris Redfield a boulder-punching asshole, and I'm like, I get that. But this game is The Village. It's all about the setting. The map, although relatively small, is packed with so much stuff to discover. It feels so much bigger than it actually is. It's a believable place, just people living their lives. The desolation is unnerving in contrast to the relative normality and the layout of the village, and the Four Lords' residences are literally batshit, and it fills it with character. And the Four Lords provide their own character too, helped massively by some wonderful voice acting, especially Lady Dimitrescu. She is hands down the best character in this game. Ethan has some good delivery too, but is hilariously hit and miss.
Fuck you, you crazy bitch!
But But if you wanted to experience these settings in a different way, there is one last game mode to play, Mercenaries Mode. Basically unlock the goal to exit the level by hitting a specific requirement, usually killing a certain number of enemies. You don't have the weapons you would have in the main game either, and at the start of each round you can visit the Duke's shop to spend a predetermined amount of money on his wares such as weapons and upgrades. And yeah, that's about it. Kill enemies to score points, try not to break your combo, find power-ups for perks and time increases. Yeah, I didn't spend a great deal of time on this. I mean, I can see how this might appeal to some, but this is not the gameplay style I'm here for. And I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of trying to achieve triple S rank on all the levels and end up hating this game or something. I'll stick to the main campaign, thank you very much.
I am so glad I finally took a shot at a Resident Evil game. I knew I'd like it, but I didn't know I'd like it this much. Like, I have never played a game 11 times in a row before. And yet, it makes me want to play more of these games. I associate Resident Evil with, zombies. So I'd like to know how we got from zombies to Lycans. I'm all prepped to go from start to finish with this series, so I'm just gonna pop in the first game.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
Oh yeah, I can tell I'm gonna like this a lot.
Hey kids, thanks for sitting through this. I know it was a bit long, but I just could not say anything about this game. I love it so much. Don't forget to like and subscribe and follow me on Instagram and Twitter. I hope to cover this whole series, so you don't want to miss that. And I'll see you next time, kids. Goodbye.